Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to viewers' questions on everything from the principles of economics to the course of history to the state of the world today.
All right, here's a question from Laura, who's asking what it means for the federal government that Parliament Hill mostly sits on unceded Algonquin land.
That's an excellent question, and one which I do not recommend that you put to the federal politicians who take great pleasure in stating at every imaginable moment that it is unceded Aboriginal land, or even flat out that it's Aboriginal land. Because they seem to think that they can say this kind of thing to curry favor with the politically correct and never have it result in any legal consequences. And very possibly that is not how others see it, including, I don't know, the people claiming they own it, who believe they have an actual valid, enforceable in court, legal claim to that land. Now, if that's not true, then it's just empty verbiage of the sort that gets politicians' applause without committing them to anything, which I guess is mostly harmless for us, though kind of morally compromising for them. But what if the reverse is true? What if it does have some meaning in law? Well, it doesn't, I think, mean that the Algonquins are going to come and take Parliament Hill and move it somewhere else. That's pretty unlikely. It also very likely does not mean that the Parliament buildings will be torn down and MPs will have to meet somewhere else, like the Museum of Natural History. What it would mean if the Algonquins were to go to court and win, and they are apparently going to court in part because negotiating with the federal government is an agonizing experience for them, as dealing with it is for just about everybody.
I can imagine that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, oh yes, we love you, absolutely no problem here. We'll just sit down and talk for the next 38 years and give you nothing. But should they successfully establish a claim, it's like what happens if you, say, order a block of marble to carve into a sculpture, and then somebody else sees it at the end of the drive, thinks it was meant for them, takes it off and carves it into a sculpture. They can't give you back the uncarved block of marble, so they have to give you something approximately equivalent in value. So if
Like
the Algonquins can claim that they should still own Parliament Hill as it was before it became the seat of Canada's legislature, then they would be entitled to monetary compensation. But to say that, I might be accused of being Eurocentric here, and that's not just a cheap shot on my part. It's a very important point. I'm talking about the way that Canadian courts operate under the legal system that we inherited from Britain and that grew out of the Great Middle Ages. A lot of Aboriginal leaders have a very different vision of the meaning of Aboriginal title, that they think they are actually are sovereign nations. They're always talking about this, the Proclamation of 1763 and their relationship to the Crown, not to the current government of Canada. That they demand nation-to-nation dealings, even if there are only a few hundred or even a few dozen of them. And from their point of view, what this means is that they get the territory back, that it becomes part of their country, and we settlers, even if we and all our ancestors have been here for 10 generations, have to leave and go somewhere else. And what I dislike about all this cheap rhetoric from politicians, particularly on this point, is that they are creating expectations they have no intention of trying to meet and couldn't meet if they did intend to meet them. And I think that if it were up to me, and as you know, many things would be different if it were up to me, but I would say to Aboriginals that in the process of European settlement, a number of treaties and deals were made that have not been honored properly. It's not as one-sided as you might gather from listening to the radicals, but there is no doubt that there was a failure to keep commitments, and there was often bad faith in the making of them and the performance of them. So, any Aboriginal who can demonstrate that they should have inherited something from their ancestors because of a promise that was made by the Canadian or British government, and they did not do so, is entitled as an individual Canadian citizen to appropriate compensation. And that compensation may not be lavish, but whatever it is, it's going to come in the form of the kind of property, including money, that exists under the Canadian legal system. That we are not going to reduce Canada to a very small portion of the land it now occupies and establish Indigenous sovereign governments, members of the United Nations, with their own courts, their own legislatures, their own military on much of the landmass that is now Canada. That is not going to happen. That ship has sailed. That is no more going to happen than the Romans are going to get back Britain south of Hadrian's Wall. Whether or not it was unjustly taken from them, there comes a point in time at which title is extinguished by the facts of history. And that doesn't mean individuals should not be compensated, but there is no collective right here. There's no re-establishment of the sovereignty of nations that are not now members of the world of actual existing countries. And it's very important that people should not raise empty expectations that lead to frustration and rage. They should be frank about this. All Aboriginals are and shall remain Canadian citizens. And if their ancestors were ripped off by the Canadian government, just like anybody else, they pursue a claim in court that brings them monetary compensation. To that extent, there is a safe, sound legal meaning to the claim that Parliament Hill is unceded Algonquin territory. Otherwise, it creates dangerous illusions and impossible expectations, and that is a bad combination.
All right. Thanks for that, folks. If you would like to play along and ask your question of the professor, go to the URL on your screen and everything there will be explained. Thanks, and see you next time.